Numbers don't lie, but families sure do, and I spent 36 years believing those were somehow two different subjects. My name is Andy Morgan. I run a small bookkeeping practice out of a converted storefront on Monroe Street in Madison, Wisconsin, a few blocks from the Arboretum, in a building that used to be a bicycle shop before I took it over 6 years ago and put my own name on the glass. I do the books for about 40 small businesses across Dane County, a couple of restaurants, a landscaping outfit, a family-owned hardware store that's been on the same corner since the Eisenhower administration. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest work, and it's taught me one thing that's turned out to matter a great deal more in my personal life than I ever expected it to. Every number has a story behind it, and most people would rather feel a number than actually look at it. I was up early on a Saturday in the second week of March, coffee not even finished brewing yet, when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. My brother Ryan, 39, had sent a message to the family group chat, not to me directly, which I'd come to understand over the years was its own particular kind of message. Need $7,200 wired for Sophie's Sweet 16. Details below. Underneath it came 3 photos. A rented event space out by the lake with string lights already hung for the mock-up photo. A floor-length dress on a hanger. The kind with a price tag you have to actually search for because the boutique doesn't believe in putting it anywhere obvious. And a cake shaped like a stack of designer shopping boxes, $700, according to the invoice screenshot Ryan had helpfully included, as though the itemization made it more reasonable rather than less. I sat there at my own kitchen table, looking at my phone like it owed me an apology. My mother Barbara replied within about 90 seconds. 3 clapping hand emojis and the word gorgeous. My Aunt Carol, my father's sister, sent a row of hearts. Nobody in that entire thread asked how any of it would actually get paid for, because in my family, that question has had exactly one answer for as long as I can remember, and the answer has always been me. I want to explain how a thing like this gets built, because nobody hands you a decade's worth of debt all at once. It arrives once at a time. The first one I actually remember clearly was Ryan's truck transmission. Back when Sophie was around 5, and it went out in a grocery store parking lot in the middle of February, snow coming down sideways, Ryan standing there with a car seat in one hand and no way to get his kid home. $900, just this once. Then it was a security deposit when he and Michelle moved into a bigger rental after Sophie was born. Then a phone bill he swore he'd pay back by the 15th of the following month. Then a credit card balance that had somehow climbed north of $4,000, while in his words, he wasn't really looking. Each one arrived wrapped in the same sentence. You're the only one I can ask. And the maddening thing is, he wasn't wrong. I was. I always was. I moved the money before I let myself feel it leaving my own account, because feeling it would have meant admitting there was a pattern, and admitting there was a pattern would have meant I'd eventually have to do something uncomfortable about it. So I didn't count. That was my entire strategy, if you could even call it one. I kept receipts and bank transfer confirmations in a folder on my laptop I almost never opened. The way you keep a smoke detector you assume is working just because it's mounted on the ceiling. Somewhere in those years, I'd started quietly putting things in my own name too, without anyone in my family fully realizing it. A deposit here. A hold there. Just so you don't lose the spot, Andy. I'll pay you back next month. I never got paid back. I never really asked for it either, and I've come to understand that particular silence was mine to own, not theirs. I was the fixer. Being the fixer felt, for a very long time, exactly like being loved, and I never once let myself sit with the question of what I'd actually be worth in that family if I ever stopped fixing things. People assume I paid because I had it, and that's the easy explanation, so I let people believe it for years. It isn't the true one. The true one is smaller and considerably less flattering. I paid because paying was the only language in my family that reliably translated into I matter here. I grew up the older brother in a house in Beloit, Wisconsin, about 40 minutes south of where I live now, in a home where money was tight most years and love. When it showed up loud, big gestures, big holiday dinners, big declarations, but rarely showed up as the quiet, dependable kind. Somewhere along the way I learned the fastest route to being needed was to be useful. Ryan was the one people worried about. I was the one people relied on. Those are not remotely the same thing, and the second one, I've since learned, is a lot lonelier than it looks from the outside. When you're the reliable one, nobody actually checks on you. They just check whether you're available. So I made myself endlessly available. I fronted the deposits and covered the holds and kept my own folder closed. Because as long as I was the one holding everything up, I never had to find out whether they'd still want me around the table if I ever set it down. I still remember the exact afternoon the credit card thing happened, because it's the clearest example I've got of how the whole system worked without anybody ever having to say the quiet part out loud. Ryan called me on a Sunday, Sophie in the background somewhere singing along to a cartoon, and he didn't lead with the number. He never led with the number. "Hey, man," he said. So, weird thing happened with the bank. What kind of weird thing? Michelle and I were looking at the statement, and I guess the interest just kind of got away from us on one of the cards, he said, and I could practically hear him deciding in real time how much of the actual truth to hand me. "It's higher than we thought." "How much higher?" "Like 4,000, give or take." I sat with that number for a second. The way you sit with any number that arrives dressed up as smaller than it actually is. "Give or take what, Ryan?" 4,200, he admitted finally. "But listen, I'm not asking you to just hand it over. I was thinking maybe you could do like a personal loan thing, and I'd pay you back with interest, like a real arrangement." We both knew, even as he said it, that there was never going to be a real arrangement. There was going to be a wire transfer, and then silence, and then, 18 months later, some other number dressed up as smaller than it actually was. I paid the 4,200 that week. I did not draw up paperwork. I did not charge interest. I told myself, the way I always told myself, that this was simply what older brothers did, and I hung up the phone before I could sit with how much that sentence had already started to feel like something I was reciting rather than something I actually believed. That was the deal I'd made without ever once saying it out loud. And here's the sentence I would have carved into that folder if I'd ever had the nerve to open it. "Love that keeps a running balance isn't love, but love that never checks the balance isn't safe either." I'd spent a decade so afraid of the first half of that sentence that I never once looked hard at the second. I told myself that checking would be cold, that counting would be cruel, that real families don't audit each other, and a family that had spent 36 years training me to believe exactly that was about to send me a bill for $7,200 and call it a birthday party. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Here's the part nobody in my family knew, because I hadn't told a single one of them, and telling them would have felt, in the strange internal logic of that house, like bragging. In my family, you don't get to be proud out loud unless the thing you're proud of belongs to somebody else. 3 weeks earlier, I'd finally started the paperwork on a house, not a big one, a 3-bedroom bungalow over in the Shanks Corners neighborhood, with a leaning garage and a kitchen that needed work, and to me it was an absolute cathedral. I'd been renting an apartment above a bike shop on Willie Street since I was 23. I'd been saving toward a down payment since I turned 28, in a separate account I hadn't touched once in 8 years, the single account in my entire financial life, with what I thought of, only half-jokingly, as a lock on it. My loan officer, a straightforward guy named Gregory Patterson at a credit union off University Avenue, had been very clear with me during underwriting. Sitting across a desk from me 2 weeks earlier, with my file open in front of him. "Reserves stay exactly where they are between now and closing," Gregory told me, tapping the printout with his pen. "Don't take on new debt. Don't move large sums around, even temporarily, even if you're planning to move the money right back. Underwriters get nervous about big transfers this close to close, and nervous underwriters ask for explanations you don't want to have to write. What counts as a big transfer?" I asked him, half joking, already knowing the answer wasn't going to be a number I liked. "Anything that looks like it doesn't belong in the pattern of your normal spending," he said. "You'd be surprised how many deals fall apart in the last 30 days over exactly that kind of thing. People panic, they move money to help a relative, and suddenly they're explaining a $5,000 withdrawal to an underwriter who's never met them and doesn't care about their reasons. I remember laughing a little when he said it, telling him that wasn't going to be a problem for me. That my family knew better than to ask for anything this close to closing. I did not know it yet, sitting in that office with my own signature drying on a stack of disclosure forms, that in exactly 14 days, my family was going to ask me for precisely that kind of number, without knowing a single thing about the timeline they were about to walk straight into. In other words, without ever meaning to, they'd have asked me to do the exact thing I'd just told a stranger, with total confidence, that my family would never do. To my family, I was just the brother with the good job who's doing fine. Fine was a costume I'd worn for so long they genuinely believed it was my actual skin. They didn't know about the spreadsheet where every single dollar in my life had a name and a job attached to it. They didn't know that $7,200 wasn't some favor I could simply absorb without noticing. It was, very precisely, the difference between closing on that house in March and starting the entire process over from nothing. And it would come straight out of the one account in my life that was supposed to finally be mine, the first thing I'd ever built that wasn't quietly propping somebody else up. That, I think, is the detail that finally turned the key in me. Not the cake, not even the number itself, the plain fact that they were reaching, without knowing it, straight for the one drawer I'd spent 8 years learning to keep shut. So I called my brother that Saturday morning, and I kept my voice easy, because I've learned over the years that the calmer I sound on the phone, the more room people give themselves to accidentally say the true thing out loud. "Hey," Ryan said, picking up on the second ring, already sounding a little defensive, like he knew this call was coming the moment he hit send on that group text. "Before you say anything, I know it's a big number. I'm not calling to argue," I said. "I'm just curious what the real budget looks like, not to fight about it. I just want the whole picture." I said that twice, on purpose, just to watch what he'd do with the extra room. There was a pause on his end, the kind Ryan does when he's deciding exactly how much of something to actually hand you. "Why does it matter?" He said finally, "Family takes care of family, Andy. That's just what we do." And there it was. The entire operating philosophy of my whole family, delivered in one sentence, gently enough that it almost sounded like wisdom instead of what it actually was. Family takes care of family. It never once meant all of us take care of all of us. It meant the ones who could carry the ones who wouldn't, and everybody in that house had spent decades calling it love, so nobody ever had to call it what it actually was. "How much is the venue?" I asked, softer this time. "How much is the dress? What's already been put down as a deposit?" Ryan sighed, like I was suddenly being the difficult one in this conversation. "You already covered the venue deposit, remember? Back in the fall. So really, it's not even that much more on top." I sat very still at my own kitchen table. I did remember, sort of, the way you remember a dream the next morning, in fragments, half-formed, easy to talk yourself out of. Ryan had asked me back in October for just a small hold on an event space so they wouldn't lose the date, and I'd wired $400 without giving it a second thought, the way I'd wired 100 small things without a second thought for 10 straight years. "So you're telling me," I said slowly, "that I already paid the first installment on a party I didn't know I was co-hosting." "Don't make it weird," Ryan said. "It's Sophie's 16th birthday, man, come on." I did not know it yet, sitting there at my kitchen table with my coffee finally finished and gone cold, but that phone call was only the opening move. 10 minutes after I hung up, my father was going to call me himself, and what he said was going to be the sentence that ended up costing my family considerably more than $7,200 by the time all of this was finished. My father, Donald Morgan, is 71 years old, spent 38 years working the line at a manufacturing plant outside Beloit before he retired, and has never in his entire life been what I'd call a subtle man. 10 minutes after I hung up with Ryan, my phone rang again, and I already knew, before I even looked at the screen, exactly what conversation I was about to have. "Ryan tells me you're giving him a hard time about Sophie's party," he said. "No hello, no how are you." Straight into it the way he always does when he's already decided he's right. I asked him what the real budget was, I said. That's the whole conversation. "You've got the money, Andy," he said. "You've always had the money. This family has never once had to worry about you the way we worry about your brother. And now, when he actually needs something, you're going to sit there and nickel and dime a 16-year-old's birthday party? Dad, it's $7,200, I said. That's not nickel and diming. That's a used car. It's your niece, he said. And his voice had gone flat and cold in the particular way it used to go right before he'd send me to my room as a kid, except I was 36 years old, standing in my own kitchen, in a house I hadn't bought yet. You pay up, Andy, or as far as I'm concerned, you're no longer family. I mean that. I'm tired of you acting like money is more important than blood. I stood there holding the phone for a long moment, and I want to be honest with you about what went through my head in that exact second, because I think it matters more than anything else in this whole story. I didn't feel rage. I felt something quieter and considerably more clarifying than rage. I felt, for the first time in 36 years, like I could actually see the whole shape of the thing I'd been standing inside of my entire life. Okay, Dad, I said. I hear you. I hung up the phone, and I did not call him back that day. That night, I made one phone call. Not to my father, not to Ryan. I called the event space out by Lake Mendota that Ryan had booked for Sophie's party, the same venue whose deposit I'd apparently already covered back in October, without fully understanding what I was covering. This is Andy Morgan, I told the coordinator who answered, a young woman named Kelsey. I'm the one who put down the deposit on the Morgan event back in the fall. I need to cancel the booking. Oh, sure, I can help with that, Kelsey said, sounding a little confused, pulling up the file. I do have you listed as the card on file for the deposit and the balance both. Can I ask what's changed? Family circumstances, I said, which was, if you think about it for more than about 4 seconds, the single truest sentence I said that entire day. I called the dress boutique next, a shop downtown on State Street, that Michelle had apparently already put the dress on hold at, again under my card number, a detail I only discovered when the very patient young man on the phone read it back to me. I called the bakery last, the one making the $700 cake shaped like designer shopping boxes, and canceled the order outright. Eating the deposit rather than let it ride any further into a party I now understood, with total clarity, that I had been quietly financing the entire time, without a single member of my family ever using the word please. By 7:30 the next morning, my phone had 14 missed calls on it. Michelle first, then Ryan, then my mother, then my father, then Ryan again, twice more. I made a pot of coffee. I drank the whole first cup before I called anybody back. Michelle called a second time around 8:15, and this time I picked up, mostly because her name on my screen didn't carry the same dread that Ryan's or my father's did. Andy, please tell me you didn't actually cancel everything, she said, and I could hear real panic in her voice. Not performance, not anger. Just a mother genuinely scrambling. Sophie doesn't know yet. We haven't told her anything's wrong. I did cancel it, I said. All 3 vendors. I'm sorry you're the one who has to have that conversation with her, Michelle. I mean that. But I'm not sorry I made the call. We can figure out a payment plan, she said. You don't have to eat the whole thing at once. We need some of it at least to not lose the deposits. The deposits were already mine, I said as gently as I could manage. I paid them in October. I just didn't know until Saturday that I'd been the one paying for the whole thing from the very beginning. There was a long pause on her end, long enough that I genuinely wondered if the call had dropped. I didn't know that's how Ryan set it up, she finally said, quietly. I swear to you, Andy, I thought the venue had its own payment plan going. I didn't know your card was on the file. I believed her. I want to be honest about that, because I think it matters. Michelle has never once, in all the years I've known her, asked me for anything directly. It was always funneled through Ryan, always dressed up as his idea, and I think some part of both of us understood, standing on either end of that phone call, that the two of us had been kept in the dark about slightly different halves of the exact same arrangement. I'm coming out to the house tomorrow, I told her. I think it's time everybody in that kitchen hears the same version of this at the same time. I drove out to my parents' house in Beloit that Sunday afternoon, not because anyone convinced me to, but because I'd decided, somewhere around that second cup of coffee, That if this conversation was finally going to happen after 10 years, it was going to happen in person, at a kitchen table, with everyone in the room at the same time, instead of scattered across 14 separate phone calls where everybody could talk past each other in private. I brought a manila folder with me. I'd spent most of Saturday night building it, going back through 8 years of bank statements and old text threads, a process that took considerably longer than I expected, mostly because I kept having to stop and sit with what I was actually finding. Ryan and Michelle were already there when I arrived. Sophie upstairs, thankfully, probably on her phone, blessedly unaware of the storm gathering 2 floors below her. My mother had her arms crossed the second I walked in. My father stood near the stove with the specific posture of a man rehearsing his opening line. "You humiliated your brother," my father said, before I'd even gotten my coat off. The venue called Ryan directly asking about the cancellation. "Do you have any idea how that made him look?" "I do, actually," I said, because I was the one who called and canceled it myself, using my own card, the same card that's been on file for that venue since October. When Ryan told me it was just a small hold so you wouldn't lose the date, Michelle's face did something complicated. Ryan's jaw tightened. "That's not the point," Ryan said, his voice climbing. "The point is, you humiliated me in front of a vendor, over a party for your own niece, because you decided this was the hill you wanted to die on." "Ryan," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to, "I have never once raised my voice at you in this house in 36 years. I'm not going to start on the morning I finally stopped being afraid of it." "This isn't about being afraid," my father cut in. "This is about you deciding, out of nowhere, that money matters more to you than your own family." "It's not out of nowhere, Dad," I said. "It's 10 years in the making. You just weren't the one keeping track of it, so it feels like it came out of nowhere to you." "It didn't come out of nowhere to me." "So what? You've been sitting on some kind of grudge this whole time?" Ryan said, "Waiting for the perfect moment to blow it all up on my daughter's birthday?" "I've been sitting on a folder," I said, "not a grudge. There's a difference, and I think today's the day this family finally learns it." I waited until the noise in that kitchen ran out of gas on its own, until Ryan was breathing hard, and my father was red in the face, and my mother had one hand pressed flat against her own mouth, like she already sensed where this was headed and wanted to physically hold the next part back. Then I set 2 fingers on the manila folder and slid it into the center of the table. "Before anybody says another single word about how I've handled this," I said, "I want everyone in this kitchen to see what we've actually been handling for 10 years. Nobody touched it, so I opened it myself, turned it around so everyone could read it right side up, and laid the pages out flat across the table. 10 years of my family's version of love, itemized, dated, and totaled in a currency they had always sworn we didn't keep score in. The transmission," I said, pointing to the first line. "The security deposit. The phone bill. The credit card balance you told me you'd pay back by the 15th. The venue deposit from October. The $400 I fronted on the boutique hold. It's all there. Every wire, every date, every dollar." My mother leaned over the table, and I watched her read the total at the bottom of the last page, and I watched every ounce of certainty drain straight out of her face. $38,750. Nobody said anything for a long moment. It was, without question, the loudest silence that kitchen had produced in the entire 36 years I'd been walking into it. "I'm not showing you this to hurt anybody," I said. "I'm showing you because I love this family too much to keep quietly lying to all of you about what I've actually been doing for the last decade." My father made a sound like he wanted to speak. I kept going, still quiet, still steady, the calmest I think I've ever sounded in that entire house. "And I'm not canceling Sophie's party because I stopped loving her," I said. "I'm canceling it because I finally started." That was the sentence that cost me. I watched it land on every single face in that kitchen, my mother's expression crumpling. My father turning half away from the table like he physically couldn't hold eye contact with what I'd just said. Ryan's mouth opening with absolutely nothing coming out of it. And worst of all, Sophie, who had apparently come down the back stairs at some point during all of this, and was standing quietly in the kitchen doorway, having heard enough of it to understand the shape of the thing. her eyes filling up in a way that broke something in my chest that I'm still honestly working on repairing. I did not take any of it back. That, more than the cancellation itself, was the actual choice I made that morning. Every cell in my body, 36 years of training, screamed at me to soften it, to fix everybody's face the way I'd been fixing everything else in that family for a decade. I stood there instead and let the room hurt, because the alternative was letting all of us stay quietly sick and calling it peace, the way we always had. I won that morning, and I felt the full weight of exactly what it cost to win it. When I finally spoke again, it wasn't to apologize, and it wasn't to twist the knife any deeper either. It was to draw the line I should have drawn 10 years and $38,000 earlier. I'm not doing this anymore, I said. No more surprise deposits under my card. No more holds in my name I find out about after the fact. No more discovering I already paid for something before anyone even asked me. I looked at Ryan. But I'm not walking away from you, or from Sophie. If you want, the two of us can sit down, really sit down, and figure out something for her birthday that we can actually both afford. I'll put a real number on the table where everyone can see it. Never under it again. Ryan didn't answer right away. He was still too far inside his own hurt, I think, to hear that I was handing him something considerably better than money. The truth. And a version of his brother who was actually going to last. My father walked out the back door and let the screen slap shut behind him without another word. I let him go. Because I understood, standing there in that kitchen, that he wasn't storming off in anger so much as he was fleeing something that genuinely scared him. A son he could no longer buy peace from in the only language he'd ever learned to speak fluently. My mother sat down heavily at the table and put her face in both hands. It was not a happy ending. I want to be completely honest with you about that, because I think a story like this owes you the truth more than it owes you a bow on top. Nobody hugged me on the way out. Nobody told me I'd been right. I had walked into that kitchen and set a truth down flat on the table, and the truth had done exactly what truth does. It doesn't comfort you. It clears things out. Standing there in the wreckage of a morning I'd chosen for myself, I felt something I don't think I'd ever once felt in that house in 36 years. I felt like I was standing in my own family's kitchen as myself, not as the fixer, not as the wallet with a pulse, just Andy finally, and at considerable expense, just me. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected, and lonelier too, and I won't pretend otherwise. My father didn't call me for the better part of a month, and when he finally did, it was about something else entirely. A minor issue with his truck registration of all things, and neither of us mentioned that kitchen once, which is, I've come to learn, about the closest thing to a truce men like my father know how to offer. My Aunt Carol stopped speaking to me altogether for the better part of the year. The family telegraph did exactly what it always does, and in certain corners of that extended family, I became, and remained to some degree, the son who abandoned everybody over money. I've learned you cannot correct a story in a house that badly needs somebody to play the villain, so mostly, I let them. But here's what else turned out to be true. My savings sat exactly where they were supposed to, untouched, whole, my loan closed at the end of March, right on schedule. And I stood in the empty living room of that little bungalow in Schenk's Corners afterward, and actually cried. Not from grief this time, but from the strange, disorienting vertigo of standing inside a future that was, for the first time in my adult life, entirely mine. Ryan and Michelle scaled Sophie's party down to a backyard gathering with string lights and about 30 of her actual friends. And by every account I heard afterward, it was the best night of that kid's entire year. I wasn't invited. That's a particular wound I'm still letting heal at whatever speed it needs to heal at. But Sophie texted me a photo from that night, just her and her friends laughing under the lights, none of the adults in the shot at all, with a caption that read simply, "Wish you were here." About 6 weeks after that, Sophie called me herself, not through Ryan, not through Michelle, just her, on a weeknight, sounding a little nervous, the way 16-year-olds sound when they've rehearsed something in their head a few times before actually dialing. "I heard some of what happened," she said, "in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen, I was standing there and I heard it." "I know," I said. "I saw you in the doorway." "I'm not mad at you," she said, quickly, like she needed to get that part out before anything else. I just wanted you to know that. Everybody else is being weird about it, but I get it. I did the math myself, actually, after I heard the number. $38,000 is insane, Uncle Andy. That's like 4 years of college. I laughed for the first time in weeks, sitting in my own kitchen, genuinely surprised by how much lighter that sentence made me feel. It's more than that, actually. By the time you add the interest, I never charged anybody. See, that's exactly the kind of thing I want to understand, she said. Nobody in this family ever explains the actual numbers. They just say things cost what they cost. I hadn't paid for a single thing at that party, and it turned out to be, without question, the most love my family had ever managed to produce out of the least amount of money, which I was slowly beginning to understand was the entire lesson I'd spent $38,750 never quite learning on my own. The message that told me it had genuinely been worth it came about 4 months later, from Sophie herself. She'd picked up a part-time job at the movie theater on the square, opened her very first savings account, and wanted to know if I could show her how to build one of those spreadsheets I was always talking about, because there was a school trip she was hoping to go on. And she wanted to figure out the real number before she asked her parents for anything at all. I read that message standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, and I had to sit down right there on the floor, because that was the whole thing, right there, in one text, from a 16-year-old. That was the chain finally breaking one link early enough to actually matter. Sophie was going to grow up understanding, in a way none of the rest of us ever quite managed, that love and a budget are not enemies. That you can look straight at a number and still be generous, still be kind, still be entirely, unmistakably family. That checking the balance isn't the opposite of love. It's what love does when it actually intends to stick around for the long haul. Ryan called me that same week, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, it wasn't about money at all. It was just my brother, telling me he'd been thinking about me. We're not fixed. We may never be all the way fixed. But love that keeps a running balance isn't love, and love that never checks the balance isn't safe. And I've finally learned how to hold both of those things at once without letting either one of them break me. So, God willing, will Sophie. If you've ever been the family ATM, the one who always pays, the one they only call the second the card gets declined, then you already know the truth underneath all of this. It took me $38,750 and 36 years to finally learn it. The text, the cake, the ultimatum, the one call I made at 8 o'clock that night. Sometimes the single most loving word in the entire language is no. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.